Chris, who's from Scotland, wants to talk about, is it possible to be good and moral without knowing the worst you're capable of? Which I thought was really...
yeah.
Hi, Chris. Great, we can hear you. Go for it.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah. I was just curious about... it's great to be on the show, by the way. I was just curious about, is it possible to be a good person when that's all you have? Can you be a good person without knowing the worst you're capable of?
Let me ask you this. This is like asking, is it possible to be healthy without knowing how sick you can be?
Is that definitely true though? Because not to argue with you, kind of like straight up, but like, I guess another comparison would be: is it possible to be happy without knowing what it's like to be not happy? And maybe that's like, because that is another comparison, and we could say
by comparison.
More.
Yes. Yeah. Can you have happiness without having some awareness of what it means to be sad? Because
you can certainly be healthy. Because we could just define healthy as the typical state that most people are in. Like, healthy's got some subjective definition, but like, you could just live in that state your whole life without even being aware of it. Whereas if you just existed in a typical state and then one day you like stub your toe and you're like, wow, this is bad. Suddenly the rest of my life is put into context. It's been so good compared to this moment. But like, it's the same. If you're just like, just go around just helping people and like living your life or whatever, if that's something if you do the same thing every day, that's good. I mean, it's good compared to what other people do, but like, and I used the example of health on purpose because health as a concept is not particularly well defined. When there's different metrics that can be used for health, I think in the same way as we can use with respect to morality. But I think I'd love to hear what Chris's thoughts are now.
Hi there. Yeah, by all means, I think that you do have a point. You can certainly experience health without experiencing illness. But can you fully appreciate the happiness you feel without that stub toe, without that whatever that is you experience? Can you feel it as fully? Can you feel happiness as fully without feeling sad, without feeling angry, without feeling despair? That's
with
could you?
I guess what's interesting here is you could feel it in compared to viewing other people feeling bad stuff. Like if you were healthy and you'd never known anything different, and then you saw someone who like all their teeth were like rotten and painful and they were like really struggling to eat, and they told you, my teeth pain is unbearable and it makes my life really difficult, you might be like, wow, suddenly I appreciate not having horrific toothache. It's not even something I've considered before. I didn't even know your teeth could hurt, but now I know, and I can appreciate that. And in the same way, like I can live my life trying to be as moral as I like, as I can. And I don't know what the worst I'm capable of is. I mean, who does really? I mean, there probably are some people who have explored it and they're in, hopefully, not able to do that anymore. But what I can do is look at the atrocities in humanity, and I can, firstly, I can see what other humans have done, but I have a decent imagination, unfortunately, and I can imagine things that humans could do, or even that I could do. And then I can compare that to my actions and be like, well, you know what? There are some people who, without asking, put mayonnaise in sandwiches, and I never do anything that evil, and just without having, I don't need to do that in order to see that I'm a better person than that. So,
I understand what you mean. I'll be honest with you. What got me thinking about it was I've been watching a guy lately called Jordan Peterson, and I don't necessarily agree with all of his opinions, but some of them I find interesting. And he was positing the argument that, it's the whole Jungian shadow self thing, that can you truly know the best of you without knowing the worst of you? Can you truly, is being harmless the same as being good? That kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's
what your thoughts were on it.
And I just want you to know that any criticism that I have toward Jordan Peterson is not directed at you, Chris. But I would say that
there is valid criticism to be had.
I would think so. I think that, you know, if I heard Jordan Peterson, you know, like when I think of like the pinnacle of like, I don't know, healthy athletic performance stuff, I have a great deal of admiration for people who do like ultra marathons and like extreme endurance events. And like, I think that if Jordan Peterson were to be like, well, you know, would you be able to run a marathon if you'd never had leukemia? Nobody would take his ass seriously. Nobody. But when we talk about it in the context of morals, for some reason, it's like, I don't know why all of a sudden he has credibility, because it is an equally vacuous idea. And I think that it's because morals are not well defined. You know, if we're talking about morality just being a rational consideration of how our actions affect other people, questions of what we should or shouldn't do with respect to certain goals, then it's as ridiculous as thinking that you can't, you know, run a marathon if you've never had cancer. So,
yeah, I mean, in terms of like when Jordan Peterson's talking about morals, I mean, it's very hard to nail him down on his actual positions because he rarely just gives straight statements of his beliefs. But you know, it's often this argument against subjective, the idea of morality being subjective rather than objective. And
yeah,
like I feel like this comparison moral argument or whatever, I mean, when morality is subjective, which is how I would declare it to be, that's my claim,
so would I.
that I mean, in that sense, we can only determine something's moral value in comparison to other things. If we created a new universe where we're gods, and we make it so there's only one action possible, then all actions are equally moral. Like the level of morality is equal.
Morable.
Because it's all just as morable. You know,
it's a new word. Yeah, that's
and
cool. Yeah.
But then in a world where then we create a second action, then potentially one of those actions is more moral than the other one. But you know, as we start adding actions, we could add something like, this is completely ridiculous hypothetical scenario, don't think it through too much, but as we get there, like, you know, we're God and we add in like the action of, oh, you could pick the orange or something and you can eat an orange and like that's morally fine, like whatever. And then, oh, we're going to say I'm picking an apple and that's going to be bad for some reason, like whatever, I don't know. But compared to picking an apple, committing a genocide is like, it's not just a little bit worse, like it's there's a big
apples to genocide, right? That's the phrase, right?
But the thing is though, that there could, you know, in when you're a god, you could potentially create actions that have the same difference worse than genocides. You know, there's so much room for it, and all we can ever do is compare these things, and we can only compare them, like, I mean, to Jordan Peterson's point, you can compare them to what you've done yourself, but also to what is other people have done and what you can theorize, and really that's all there is. So like, to the original question, can you like be a good person without knowing the worst you're capable of? Yes, because you know what some people are capable of, or you can imagine what some people are capable of, and you can not do that. And but then there could be like new good moral actions that we discover. For example, people 100 years ago didn't know that it was morally bad to, you know, just dump chemicals into the sea or whatever, because they didn't understand that. And now we know that it's morally good to try and stop that, to the point where it'd be like, well, I should stop buying products which have this in, and I should stop voting for politicians that won't regulate this thing away. And that's like a new morally good action that potentially didn't exist in the past in the context of our society, etc., etc. But like, you know, it because it's all subjective and hard to say what it's like. We couldn't rank all the actions, but we can have a discussion about every single possible action and determine whether it's a morally good thing to do or not. And if it is and it's within your power, then I don't know. That was a little bit of a rambling answer, but I feel like the answer to your question is
don't worry about
yes.
And Katie's point, right? There is a question of like, what does one have to do with the other? What is making, exploring the space of what good moral outcomes look like? What does that have to do with exploring the space of what bad moral outcomes, would look like, or moral decisions? And the thing about Peterson that drives me nuts is like, to me, this is like the question of, can you be truly good without knowing how truly bad you can be, is just this weird, like, silly question, like with a false dichotomy sort of baked into it. And when I hear Peterson talking about stuff, it'd be like, he was like, well, could you climb Mount Everest if you haven't made your bed? And I'd be like, well, of course, yes, I could, sure. And then it'd be like, oh, but can you really? Can you, if you haven't gotten your room in order, can you fully, experience the experience? And it's just like, dude, like, what are you talking about? So, like, I get that, Peterson in his way is trying to get people to think, and that's a good thing. But yeah.
Two Peterson dunks before we go. Firstly, every action I've ever done, I've done without making my bed. So fuck you, Jordan. And I prefer beds unmade. I think it's nicer when they're all like still cocoon mode from the night before, rather than all like straight and tucked in. Anyway, and the other thing is, I will only be super quick, but just because I have the chance, and potentially people in the audience who think he's all right. He's like got famous for dunking on trans people and lying about a law that he was just objectively wrong on. And you can just go look it up. He was factually wrong. He never knew at any point what he was talking about. He's still doing it. He's a knobhead in that sense. He could still. Oh well, I'm not saying people who like him are bad. I'm not doing a guilty by association. What I'm saying is that he has a lot of credibility issues. And it's worth being aware of the full spectrum of the man. It's also worth looking up his diet, because that's another. But he could still be right about climbing Everest and making your bed, but he's also wrong about that. So take every claim on its own, but when he's consistently wrong.
There you go.
Anyway, sorry, Chris. Would you like to sum up, and then we'll call it a day?
Yeah, of course.
How do you feel this has affected your view?
I'm sorry, on you go.
No, I was just saying, how has what we've said helped?
It has. I think there is something to be said for, are you really being good if you don't really know? If you have two choices, bad or good, and you go with good, but you know that you're capable of the bad, I think there is something to be said for holding back the darkness within yourself, so to speak. But I think that there is, as you say, I think there is something of a, well, I'm sorry, I've forgotten the term you used. I think that the two things don't necessarily match up,
Sure.
Yeah. It's good to think, Yeah. Some of these questions, it's like, oh, that's an interesting thought. And then it makes you think, like, I could, almost every single second that passes by, there's a bad action I could do, which would be worse than one I don't do. Whatever, am I even making these choices?
Every day.
Oh, well, it's interesting, but don't let it consume you, because, like, lots of what he says is wordy nonsense.
Well, and recognize that good moral decisions exist on a spectrum. So, like, in the same way, if you're thinking about what to have for breakfast tomorrow, and maybe the worst thing you could possibly have would be poison, and you decide that you're going to have like a
human baby with mayonnaise, mate, much worse.
Yeah. A human baby with mayonnaise would be really, really bad. And then you decide you're going to have a bowl of cereal. Well, is a bowl of cereal the perfect choice? Is that the absolute most optimal, goodest of all good breakfasts that you could have? Probably not, No. But did you make a bad choice? Where on the spectrum of perfect to worst possible did you land? Yeah, and the idea is that, like, good moral decisions, it's like it's a journey, not a destination, to get really cliche with it. So yeah.
But anyway, thank you very much for this call, Chris. We are going to have to end because the next show is coming up soon. So thanks for calling in, and it's a really good discussion topic. I'm glad we could get you back on.